So this is a personal talk. Those of you here to hear more about music, I apologize. There's nothing about music in this talk at all. In 35 years or so of training, for the most part, it's all been C++ or something in that area. There's videos of my presentations, and I'll talk about modern C++. But this is different, and for years, I never really had a reason to want to do something like this, and now I kind of do. So I hope, by the end of it, that'll come clear and make sense. Okay. So this first slide was actually initially a joke. It was blank except for about the presenter, and the joke was the whole presentation is about me. So it's like I don't need a slide for it. And then I thought that's stupid to have a blank slide, so I found a bunch of pictures to tell you a bit about my life. You can tell from the pictures the stuff I'm interested in. And that's my son and our grand dog, who is now, my wife has Ripley, the grand dog, by herself at home, so I'm feeling guilty, but she'll do okay. So this is kind of a historical talk. For reasons, again, I hope to make clear toward the end, and I'm going to start at the beginning. So at the very beginning, I came into existence in Hollywood, California in 1959 with a couple of parents who were Holocaust survivors. They're both Polish Jews, started off in Poland, didn't know each other. There's a Steven Spielberg movie in what they went through. They ended up in California in the mid-50s, and then in 59 I came along. And only child, no relatives, like really anywhere around. The closest one was 100 miles away, and she was like very old. So life was very strange. My folks never really took to like Western culture. They were still kind of ensconced in Eastern European thinking and all of that. So we spoke Polish and Hebrew at home, and I was growing up in the middle of Los Angeles. Finally went to school and started to deal with all that stuff, and it was quite a shock. So elementary school, right, first to sixth grade, I think I attended 4 or 5 different schools. Never moved. I lived at the same address the whole time. When my dad didn't like something about one school, middle of the term, he just picked me up and plopped me into a different school, because that solved whatever problem he was having in that situation. So sanity finally arrived in junior high. From 7th to 9th grade, my junior high was right down the street. I could walk, and 3 years, same school, same people. Life could actually be fun. That was where I sort of woke up, really, in my life, like junior high. And it prepared me for high school. And it was really in high school that computers kind of came into my life, and I needed something to really focus on. And the first week of high school, I think I was walking down the hall and heard a funny noise coming out of the room. And it was an ASR 33 teletype that was connected to a time-shared basic system downtown. And I was off and running. And in the 3 years of high school, this is some of the stuff that I did around LA. So at the high school basic and Fortran, we bubbled in Hollerith codes on cards with pencil, the same codes you get in a key punch machine. Anybody ever bubble Hollerith cards with a pencil? Yeah, fun, isn't it? So we submit a card deck, and 3 days later it would come back, and we begin to fix the bubbling errors. And 1 or 2 cycles, then we'd start syntax errors. 1 or 2 cycles, actual logic. 1 or 2 cycles, pretty it up. So it took 2 or 3 months to write a Fortran program back then. So it helped to kind of go somewhere else where you could do it quicker. So I explored the local schools and facilities. USC had a nice basic programming lab where they didn't really care who walked in. LACC had a lab with APL and batch submission and real key punch machines for the cards instead of having to pencil them in. My last year of high school, I got a job somehow at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. The job they wanted me to do was like flow charting Fortran programs or something. And the space they gave me to work was a lab where they were like doing experiments on dogs or something. It was awful. And I got them to let me go to the computing center and just work there instead, and I had a blast there. There was a visiting French doctor who had software for doing echocardiographic heart data, and I made the plotter there actually plot the stuff out, and it was awesome. So that's probably what got me into MIT, I think, is that on my resume. It was pretty different. Of course, the Southern California Computer Society was around, and this environment here kind of brings me back to the SCCS days where everybody was all getting all excited about all the new 8-bit systems out there and trading information. I really learned a lot with the folks at the SCCS. I remember once on my IMSAI box, we'll get to that shortly, I needed a new keyboard. The keyboard I had was like uppercase only and not great. And there were these keyboards that were available, the Sargent Sentry Surplus keyboards, and they were 8-bit and upper and lowercase, but they weren't latched. And there was a fellow who would offer us to go over to his house where he had wire wrapping set up, and he just let us create our own little wire wrap latch and showed us how to design it and wrap it, and I made a little latch to fit inside my keyboard enclosure, and this was very exciting. So early SCCS experiences. I learned assembly language at the UCLA Computer Club. You could just go, anybody could walk in and take a class, and assembly was really exciting to me, really down into the iron and see what the machine can really do. So that got my kind of my blood flowing with low-level, high-performance programming. I wanted to give a nod to this fellow, Gene Robidoux. He's passed away now, but he was really the one who kind of saved my life in high school. He would stay after school 2 or 3 hours every day on his own time and let a couple, 3 of us use the terminals that were there to learn on. And I would hope everybody has someone kind of from their early education who really made a big difference, and this was the guy who was for me. And we became friends later on. Years went by. I couldn't even get a hold of him. I posted somewhere, I wish I could get a hold of this guy, and somebody saw it and told him, and we got back together, and we had dinner a bunch of times, and when he was visiting, I live in Boston, he's still in LA, but he would come out and visit, and we get together. That was great. I wanted to just talk about this first genius hack involving an ASR33 teletype. This is a spitting image of the machine I learned to program on for the first time. Keyboard, 10 characters a second, reliable as all hell. Paper tape reader and punch, right? To log into the basic system, you typed the code and then a password, and the teacher would always shield his fingers like this and look around, type in the password. It was like 8 or 9 characters. And so nobody knew the password except the teacher here. There were 2 classrooms, and my daughter was nice enough to do this illustration for me. And this is close enough that the rooms weren't back to back, but they were essentially like this. So there was one terminal, maybe in one room and another in the other room, and each room had 2 connectors, and the number 1 connectors were just in parallel, and number 2 were in parallel. So you can use 2 terminals in one room at the same time, or there can be one in each of the 2 rooms. But if there's one in a different room, you just have to use the other connector. And that way, if one room was busy, the other room would be where they'd wheel the ASR33s into. And one day, one of the fellows, who was kind of a counterpart of me, somebody just learning and messing with all that, he knew the password to the basic account, and nobody could figure out how. And the teacher was really frustrated. How could you possibly know that? And then he told us, and can anybody guess how he figured out the password? Yeah, so when the teacher was in one room logging in, he plugged into the same number on the other room and turned on the paper tape punch. And then he knew how to read the codes on the paper tape, and he got the password. When I first heard that, it was like, wow. I was really impressed by that. It would never in a million years would have occurred to me to do that. And so that's where the idea of hacking was really first congealed in my head was with this guy. All right, Ed Lapping, I think was his name. I bought a copy of An Introduction to Microcomputers. That would be this one on the left. I never did buy the second one in the series, but I bought it from Adam Osborne at a huckster's table at an SCCS gathering, somewhere around 74 or 75, something like that. So I still have my copy of that somewhere, but I couldn't find it. My first programmable device, 49 steps. The book came with a program in it to do lunar lander, but it didn't give you impact velocity, which was stupid. If you're going to crash, you want to know, what speed you crashed at, right? So I rewrote it. I was taking physics that year, rewrote it with impact velocity, sent it to them. I don't think they ever updated their book, but I thought it was cool. So this is the machine my life revolved around between around 75. Senior year of high school, my physics teacher worked for the first computer store, or the second computer store in California. The first was the computer store in Santa Monica, or the computer mart, the store, the one that sold Altairs, and then the computer mart in Orange County opened, and that's the one he worked for, and I actually bought the kit for this thing from him. So, it came with bags of resistors, bags of capacitors, IC chips, sockets. I'd never held a soldering iron before in my life. He kind of taught me, my teacher taught me how to solder, and I put this thing together. And then got to play with it for many years. As an MIT student, I would haul this thing back and forth on the direct flight on American Airlines. I would not check it. It would just be destroyed completely if it got checked. So I insisted on it coming into the cabin with me, and I'm really glad. You see how that cover is metal? Well, I had a plexiglass transparent cover that people were selling. I just thought it was cool, and it was lighter, and it was a really good thing to have going through security. Because if I had tried to go through with that as you see it, I would have to unscrew 4 screws every time for them to be able to see what the heck was in this thing. With the plexiglass cover, it was all just blank, mostly empty space in there, a big backplane with like 2 cards plugged into it, so they could tell there was nothing nasty in there. After playing with the IMSAI for a while, I started producing code, and I published, I'm glad I published an article in Byte, in my favorite Byte cover of all time, which is that July 77 cover. There was a word search puzzle thing in creative computing that ended up in this collection here. And one of the regrets I have is there was a tiny basic, Palo Alto tiny basic that was published, I think, in Dr. Dobbs. And I was playing with the Tarbell cassette interface and wrote a set of load and store drivers for basic programs that you can use on the cassette tape. And I wanted to publish it. And at the time, I submitted to a magazine called Interface Age, which I guess was the successor of SCCS Interface, which was just the SCCS magazine, but they attempted to make it commercial and profitable. So they paid money for stories. So I thought, cool, I'll get paid. So they bought my article about my tiny basic extensions package and then killed it, basically. It never got published, and they eventually told me, you can just go send it somewhere else and you don't have to give us our money back. So about a year delay, it finally made it into Dr. Dobbs, and that was like a lesson, an object lesson to me. It's not really worth a few $100 if it's gonna delay by a year, the technology that people really need now. It was still useful when it came out, but it would have been more useful a year before that. Baker House, that's right. I was going to ask, does anybody recognize the dorm? It didn't take long. So I lived in Baker House from 76 through 78, and that was an amazing place. The real value of MIT to me was the people, just the people there. I didn't really take any courseware that made any difference. I already knew how to code when I got there, and never even got to the compiler course. I dropped out before I got a chance to take it. So I didn't really get much except the people. The energy from the people was just amazing. And there's one specific person there. When I was a freshman, he was a junior, Ed Ziemba. He had designed his own 8080-based computer, hardware, in a rack mount system, and then wrote all the software for it, and he had it in his dorm room, and so there I was with my IMSAI, and so we kind of were kindred spirits right off the bat, but he was like a level beyond me, the stuff that he was doing, and we'd come together to do a really cool project about 4 years after that, the first year I was there. So at MIT, they have what's called drop day. And on drop day, any courses you drop don't count against you. The next day, like you get an F or whatever. And they also drop a piano off the Baker House roof. At least they did that every year when I was an undergrad. And Doc Edgerton would be there set up with his strobe camera to take a picture of the thing hitting the ground, and it was really awesome. So on drop day 78, I dropped all my classes and dropped out of MIT. My advisor was Joe Weizenbaum. How many of you have heard of Eliza? Okay, a lot of you heard of Eliza. Did you see in the news, it was just like a month or two ago, it was like the 50th anniversary of Eliza, right? Well, I was sitting in Joe's office talking about Eliza and saying, oh, you guys wrote Eliza, that was pretty cool. And he goes, yeah, I wrote it as a joke. I go, what? It was just a joke. So it's pretty obvious, but at the time, people took it seriously because you could actually have a conversation with it, and it would do half as well as, more than that, as a typical therapist. So, yeah. So in the lab, there was an opening for a system administrator, and through Joe, I ended up getting aligned to that job, and I took it. And it was an amazing lab. They were working on what would become the Macintosh hardware. They called it the NU machine, NU, I believe at the time. My job was just system administration on a PDP 1170 Unix system, backups, just whatever admin stuff needs to happen. Steve Ward's lab, absolutely, my boss.
I had a job to sweater for the wire wrap machine in '78.
Nice. We probably ran into each other. I was there around that time, 78 to early, mid-79 or so, yeah. And then the gal from the last session talking about Marvin Minsky, who I used to hang out with a bunch too. It was really cool. Anyway, Zenith had these H89 computers. I had one of these H19 terminals. It was just a terminal. I paid a friend to put it together for me. I was tired of soldering. But the H89 had the CPM machine built into it, and they gave one to select people in the lab. So the problem is they didn't have like a C compiler for it, so they couldn't do much with it. And the only people that had high-speed modems at the time were Steve Ward and Mike Dertuzos, who was the head of the lab. They had 9600 baud rack mount modems that each of them had one at home. And nobody else had more than like 1200 baud, maybe 2400 at the time, which is, you can limp along with that, but it's not awesome. So the opportunity was there. And it was like all the stars aligned in this particular situation. Because as soon as I started working in the lab, I learned C. I go, C is cool. Oh, I'd love to have it on my machine. So somebody in the lab, Bert Halstead, he wrote an Othello program. It plays the game of Othello, dramatic reversals. It was a crappy implementation, but I just thought it'd be cool to have it running. So I started translating into machine language by myself, and I got about halfway through it. And I go, what the hell am I doing? This is like the stupidest, tedious thing. There's got to be something more fun. And I looked at all the features of C that Othello used. And I said, I bet a compiler that can compile that stuff could fit in a 64 or less, small 8-bit machine. And so I set a goal on January 1st of '79. By my birthday, I would have a compiler that could compile Othello. That was how I would get Othello. And I was close. It was actually like 2 weeks late. But mid-April, it compiled Othello. And by August, it was on the market as a commercial product. And by early next year, it was international and being distributed in Japan as well. And that is BDS C, of course, my product. So I did bring like the original binder with that picture on it. So BDS C was taking an opportunity that just, the opportunity was there. I had one shot, and I wanted to make a compiler that would be easy and fun to use. And that was more important to me than the features that it supported. The features were important, but I knew there's only so many features you could get into a CPM machine with, I allowed for the fact that for any given machine, maybe only 32 to 48K of RAM was working on that day. A lot of people use these high-powered 21L02 chips, and they would just 64 aboard. They would just burn out on a random basis. So I had typically, 40 to 48K on my machine. Would you want to buy a compiler that required 60K of RAM to even run? That was my competition, Whitesmith C. And Bill Plogger and I became really good friends, but at the time we were just two people selling a C compiler. We were on the market within a month of each other. You could buy BDS C that had a really fast development cycle but didn't support 32-bit stuff and didn't do real externals and all that. Or you could buy Weizenbaum C that was ANSI C, or not yet because it was K&R, but it was basically supported all of K&R and cost 6 times as much and ran 10 times slower. People bought both. They would buy BDS C for most prototyping, testing, and then Weizenbaum, because I didn't realize one dumb thing I did. I could have put out better code than Plogger did, but I missed one great opportunity. It had to do with how the stack pointer works. I didn't think of that. It's probably that's what I get for never taking a compiler course. But but it was good enough to let a lot of people get started. So I'm really proud of BDS C. That's like my claim to fame. It has a Wikipedia page. I don't, but BDS C does. And I think that is absolutely appropriate. And by the way, I have nothing to do with the Wikipedia page. People don't believe me, but one day it just appeared, and it is 100% accurate. Everything on that page is completely accurate. So anybody know who this guy is? Jerry Purnell, friend of mine. After BDS C came out, he was writing about stuff for Byte and invited me to his house, and I went swimming in his pool in his West Point swimming trunks, and got to meet Larry Niven, of course, half of that great writing duo, Niven and Purnell. And Jerry wrote about BDS C a few times in the column, and I really appreciate him. And I kind of regret I didn't stay in touch. He just passed away like 3-4 years ago or something like that. But great guy. All right, so as BDS C was kind of going through its evolution, Ed was playing around with his own stuff too. He's working for a printer company in Malden called Data Printer, and his little homegrown operating system, he was like morphing it to make it look more and more like Unix until like it looked just like Unix, but it was just an 8-bit machine. And I got the idea of, why don't we take your thing, make it look more like Unix, take BDS C, natural marriage, and make a product. And he thought that was a great idea. I got him to quit his job, and his company wanted him so badly, they hired him at half-time, paying him more than what they were paying him before. And now he had half the time to work on MARC. And so that project went on for about a year. Leo Cannon, good friend of mine, he actually ended up replacing me at the lab at MIT when I quit, when I went full-time with BDS C. He wrote a CP/M emulator that was beautiful. So MARC itself was parasitic. It booted parasitically under CP/M and made CP/M disappear. It took over the machine. But now if you wanted to run CP/M software, all you do is run Leo's emulator, and then you can take any off-the-shelf CP/M product and run it under MARC, and it worked. And that was the key to get that thing out there. You didn't need CP/M anymore. You could buy MARC and just start using that, and you'd be using a Unix system, basically. A single user, single task, okay? So you don't get background processes, but the look and feel and all of that, the scripting was really great. We did a demo for Dennis Ritchie at Usenix, the Usenix conference. And that was probably one of the most amazing times in my life, and I regret not bringing my copy of K&R with me. What was I thinking? So I did not have a chance to have Dennis sign the book. I'm hoping I can correct at least half of that with Brian sometime this weekend. Yeah, we were about a month away from announcing it. It was done, it was working. But Ed did his stuff, and I just did the compiler. I didn't mess with Ed's thing. He could handle that perfectly. We didn't think of like anticipating that one of us might die. So June 7th, 1981, again about a month from release, I got a call from a priest. It had died in a snorkeling accident that morning, and that was rough, really rough. My life went to a tailspin, basically. 5 years, didn't want to look at a computer, didn't want to code. I updated BDS C just to the minimal to keep it producing income and to improve the framework it already had. I didn't have the motivation to port it to like the next generation of processes or add features to it or anything. This was the first issue of the BDS C Users Group newsletter that Robert Ward took over from a guy named John Nall in Florida who had started the Users Group, and he ran out of time as a lawyer. So Robert Ward in Kansas took it over. This was issue number 1. And I remember still him calling me and like asking me questions for the article, like interviewing. Yeah, it was a rough time. But 10 years later, there was like 5 or 6 years where I didn't get a whole lot done. Then I met my wife, we got married. I moved to Kansas to work for Robert out there for 3 years. And it was a reset time. I just needed a change. And it was an awesome time. Can you find me in that picture? Anybody? I presented a talk like this just once before, and at the time nobody could identify me in the picture. Yeah, but that's my face right there. This was a Japanese language version. They just took a picture of all of us in Kansas, and that became the cover of the Japanese magazine. R&D, the company I was working for, they also decided to try book publishing, so I was the experiment. You know how books have a foreword? Yeah. So the one in my book is spelled Foreward. Yeah. So we were very new book publishing. It was a bunch of articles on C I had written, basically. And then some other stuff. There's not an interview with me in computer language later. And then the only other really significant, relatively speaking, thing I ever wrote was STL Filt, because I was already in the training business at that point. And that's the top banner there, decrypting VC++ error messages. A Perl script, basically, that would take the output of a C++ compiler. Error messages are bad. And sort of rearrange them to make them human readable. And it was a useful tool, and I thought it was just going to it'll hold everybody over for a little while until compilers get better. And today they still, I don't think, are better, not by much. All right. So back from Kansas, and I needed a change of career. I still wasn't ready to like make coding my career at that point anymore. It was just too many painful associations. And so I just decided I love to talk about it. Why don't I teach it? And so Bill Plogger kind of got me a connection into the BU Corporate Ed Center, and that's where I began teaching, and expanded to mostly corporate education after a little while. And over 30 years, it's all, again, the people are the key. So here's some of the people who are really inspiring to me, C++ gurus, educational and standard committee-wise, and know all these folks well, and really they've been super supportive to me throughout the career. So there's just a slide on STL Filt, the error message decryptor. I just thought it was cool to be calling it a decryptor. It doesn't decrypt anything. So how are we doing on time? Okay. So I have a daughter, Katie, and she's 34 now. She went to college in Indiana, came home and crashed. And nobody knew what was going on. She hung out in her room, and she's an artist, so she does manga, has some friends, but she wasn't working, she wasn't going back to school, and I wasn't really allowed to know what was going on because, according to her and my wife, I was being too pushy, and so I just didn't know what was going on. A lot of time went by, and after a while, Katie announced to us, and this is about 8 years into this period of time, that she's autistic. And so that was a surprise. And I had sort of an inkling I might be Asperger's for a while, but I never really followed up on it. It's like, oh, that would explain some of my weirdness. And then I went on with business as usual in my life. But when Katie told us about being autistic, I got more curious and would ask questions like, so what's it like to be autistic? And she would tell me a list of characteristics, socially, having problems interpreting social cues, and very sensitive to extreme senses, like sound, light, all that can be really irritating. There's a list, and each one she would tell me, I would go, oh, yeah, but doesn't everybody have that? And, that's really familiar. What's unusual about that? So after about 5 of them, the light went off. And so now I'm 64 years old and realizing, oh my God, I'm autistic. And what does that really mean? And started to look into it, and wow, there is so much information out there that I had never availed myself of. Just I didn't know that's what was going on, and it's been life-changing. So lots of new terminology that you learn when you start doing this stuff. These are just some of the terms that have become, very, very common stuff for me to be thinking about. The levels of ASD, like ASD level 1, that used to be called Asperger's. They don't use that word anymore. It's the same thing, it's just called something else. Autism spectrum disorder, that's what it's called in the DSM, the official Bible of psychological issues. But I prefer a term the woman who diagnosed me uses, which is autism spectrum difference. I used to think I was broken, but autism isn't being broken, it's just being different. Your brain works differently, it really does, and it's sometimes difficult for a neurotypical and autistic to sort of meld out eye to eye on. The words don't often land the same way. It's tricky. We mask to kind of hide the fact we're not as socially, competent, let's say, as allistic or non-autistic people. Okay, you know what? I missed some slides because I'm hitting the wrong button. Where was I? There we go. Okay. Yes. So neurodivergent typically just covers, as far as I understand, autism and ADHD, kind of the main ways of being neurodivergent. I don't like that term. It sounds like you should be locked up or something, but that's the term. And if you say, oh, I'm just neurodiverse, that actually has a different meaning. So it's awkward. Yeah, so I'm sure there are other things too. The main two, like AUDHD would be my diagnosis. It's a combination of autism, ADHD, but then there's a bunch of other spatterings of things that might be in there. And the term neurodiverse just means people's brains are different. It has nothing to do with being autistic or not, but I prefer neurodiverse, except it's wrong, so yeah. One more here, autistic burnout. I was misdiagnosed with depression at one point, and depression and autistic burnout look very similar, but they're not the same thing. And something, if I'd known, would have made life a little bit less painful back then. So the title here was A Life in 2.5 Acts. So Act 1 was my BDS C days, or survival and then BDS C. That would be Act 1. Act 2 is be responsible for your family, so steady income. So 30 years of training, which has been absolutely fun, and I got to see, 15 countries I'd have never been able to visit before because of international travel for training, and all of that was amazing. Act 3 is since the ASD awareness, and I'm about a year and a half into that right now, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. A lot of things are starting to come together. I'm starting to get some clarity. Starting to get some clarity. One of the things I like to do is educate about it, like this. That's kind of the motivation for this talk. If it wasn't for the fact I found out I'm autistic, I'd never be up here talking about BDS C in my life. Who cares, really? But there's an object lesson, and that's the part that to me is important, that it's really easy, I think, in the tech sector to be very talented, to have an incredible capacity for coding or design or whatever, and have that occupy one's life to such an extent, might miss something else that's kind of important. Now, it's not, a lot of other people that maybe it was their jobs to have noticed, but I think my dad also would have been he would have rejected any suggestions I wasn't perfect, and that plays a part into it too. So there's a lot of moving parts, and all I can say is if you think you or someone you love might be autistic, and I've guessed that somebody wasn't been wrong a couple of times, and it's really subtle, it's worth investigating, because if it ends up being true, there is just incredible wealth of information and resources out there, and I have a bunch of them on the slides I probably won't have time to talk about, but they'll be in the slide deck, which will be available, I guess, somewhere at some point when I give it to somebody. Now, this is funny. Literally a few weeks ago, February 27th, I saw this post. And I had recently joined the CPM Facebook group, because why not? And occasionally I get a chance to comment on something related to something I was involved in. And this showed up, and I go, what the heck? This fellow has all of the original 8-inch discs from Ed's development time on MARC. So they weren't like all lost, as I had thought the stuff was never going to be seen again by anybody. And this was like 2 weeks ago or whatever. So it lives, and somebody's maybe going to be trying to resurrect it and get it to work. So that's pretty exciting. You know, there are some people that keep some of this old code alive. BDS C, I put it into the public domain like 20 years ago. There's a guy in France who took it and extended it to pretty much be ANSI C. So it'll have 32 bits, types, and real linkage and prototypes, and you name it. And it only runs on a Sinclair ZX80 emulator. "40 characters by 5 lines," or something like that. And this guy was telling me about all the features he put into it, and then it's like, how about putting it on an environment where somebody else can actually use it? No. So I don't think that's going to happen. If he even finishes it to the point where anybody will ever see it. But it is possible to do that. Well, the best thing about all this is he told me at one point, you know, he went through and he translated all the 8080 code into Z80 code to take advantage of that. And he said, after doing all of that for the compiler, both passes, and the linker, the library manager code is lost, it seems. Nobody knows where it is. He said he did not find a single bug anywhere in the code. And I'm so proud of that. It's about 70,000, thank you. It's about 70,000 lines of 8080 assembly code between those components. And it was very important to me that it works. Because it was so lacking in features, at least it should be rock solid. And I got it rock solid. And I am just really happy it got to that point, to show that it is possible to have a fast, easy to use, friendly to use development cycle for C. And I'm hoping there's a bunch of people that started using C sooner than they might have otherwise because of BDS C, and that helped sort of promote the C++ ecosystem. Which was a good thing to promote, in my opinion. So I think that's close enough to the time I've been allotted. So does anybody have questions about anything, the old 8-bit days? All right, if not, I'll tell a story if there's no questions. Questions?
It's okay, I don't need a mic.
Thank you.
What are you up to now?
I just retired.
That's cool.
And I didn't even think I was going to be retired yet, but my last client ran out of money, so I think I'm retired, and I love it because this is exactly the mental environment I need to be working on. I'm reprogramming my entire neural net from the ground up with the knowledge of the autism. Because in my particular case, right, with the legacy Holocaust burden and all that, my early life is really crazy. And so not knowing I'm autistic meant there was a lot of unknowns that I couldn't, there's like 5 or 10% of all of existence makes no sense to me and never did until I got that last missing piece. And with the missing piece, there's no mystery anymore. It's not like I know everything. There's nothing that I say to myself, damn, I'll never understand X. Either I understand it or I don't care if I understand it. And that's the way I want it. And it wasn't possible until the last year or two to really do that. And it's going to take years. All these nodes in my neural net that are marked don't know, not enough information. I'm just broken, you name it. Now all of those, as I encounter them, I can reprogram them. I can reteach them the reality, which is none of those things. The reality is more pleasant than those things. So, yeah.
So what is better, programming or teaching?
Better. No, they're two different things. So the real difference for me is not knowing, like I was autistic, being more comfortable myself. Programming was a solitary activity. It was always BDS C was a one-man project. I did everything, wrote it, sold it, marketed it, was the janitor, everything for BD software. And I think the reason I chose to attempt to teach is specifically because it's hard for me. But I didn't know why. This seems hard, but I have the passion for it. I want to talk about it. It's easy for me to talk about it. It's fun. Let's see if I can pull it off. So that was rewarding as well, but in a different way. So if you write code and it's really useful, you can feel you've made that contribution. If you're training and people get inspired and go out and write great code, that's been helpful too. So they each have their own. I mean, it's what mood you're in. Are you in a solitary mood, or are you in a mood to be with people and interact? And in my case, it was like just knowing I needed to get the reps in of interacting with other people more, and that motivated me to do the teaching. I think it helped a lot in my own awareness later on.
How long did it take you to write BDS C?
I actually told you.
I probably just...
Yeah. So I started January 1st with the goal of getting it writing on my birthday, getting it working on my birthday, which was March 30th. So I just turned 66. Thank you. And I was off by 2 weeks, but pretty close, right? Yeah. But that was the first compile, like to actually get it. And then from then, mid-April to August 30th, to get it marketable. Yeah, and then it was on the market, version 1, and of course, lots of updating and lots of bug fixing for a while. But then eventually it settled down. So, yeah.
Yeah, so sometime around 1980, I was working with Roger Gregory on Project Xanadu,
Oh, yeah.
and your name came up.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was, at that point,
The Xanadu folks were awesome. They were real fans, and they needed a bunch of features in BDS C, and I gave it to them. Like dynamic overlays are there because of Xanadu, Roger's request for those.
yeah. So I thought I'd throw that in.
Other questions? Do you have more to add?
Sure, I could tell another story. So I mentioned I put together my computer, never having held a soldering iron before. So they had a fellow at the computer mart. He was the computer doctor. And when the first time I plugged it in, I smoked the power supply. I had the wires on the electrolytic caps reversed. Okay. But once I got through that and actually soldered everything together and plugged it in, it didn't work. So the whole machine went into the computer mart, and the computer doctor, his name was George, was going to look at it. And so about a week later, the guy my teacher who was the middle person there said, okay, it's done. I went and picked it up, and they charged me $20, and it was working. And I found out later the computer doctor spent about 8 hours tracing a solder bridge under an IC socket, probably one of my first sockets, and I just didn't know how much solder to put on the thing. And knew I was a high school student and charged me $20, and that was really cool. So now some years go by. BDS C has hit the market. It's pretty new still, and I got a phone call. And I pick up the phone, and hello, I go, hi, this is George Tate. So George Tate was the computer doctor. And I'm going, wow, George, this is cool to hear from you. I really appreciate the way you fixed my CPU board for only $20 because you knew I was a high school student. And he goes, oh, yeah. Well, I've got this other company now. It's called Ashton Tate. And he wanted to actually distribute BDS C. And I was too stupid to figure out how to do it because I had an exclusive contract with my New York Lifeboat Associates distributor. And I got a sweetheart deal because of that, but it also really limited the distribution. And I didn't realize that. I'm not a marketing person. I thought of myself like an author, and I need a publisher. I just want to write and ship it off and let it get published. And I don't want to deal with any of the hassle of distributing it. That was the wrong attitude. But being autistic, it's like the less I had to deal with, I could just focus on my one thing, tunnel vision, special interest, coding, write compiler, make work. So that was all I wanted to do, and I didn't care about all the other stuff. Right? I don't remember what the question was anymore.
It wasn't a question, it was
Okay.
just, no questions came up.
So the extra tape deal never happened.
No, and George was dead like a year or two later. Very young, I think he was like 47. Yeah.
You still have the acrylic inside?
Do I still have what, sorry?
The acrylic inside?
No, I don't have the IMSAI at all. I don't want to talk about it, it's too painful. Because it involves a friend. I don't want to talk about it. Any other questions? I didn't want to take it to Kansas with me, all right? So I gave it to a friend of mine. He knew what it meant to me. I never imagined he would move and just leave it in his house. Okay? So that's what happened to the IMSAI. It didn't work anymore, but still. Anyway, somebody could have fixed it. I've been eyeing that new IMSAI that you could buy, like the new version. I looked at it once or twice, and I almost pulled the trigger. It would be fun to just put it together again. And put the right amount of solder this time. Because George won't be around to bail me out.
Anybody? Okay, well, that wraps
Thank you.
it up for him.
There's a speaker's den, so I'll head over there by default. I have a bag full of like all the magazines and the pictures. I actually have the magazines if anybody wants to look at that stuff.